Call this meeting of the Intergovernmental Cooperation Authority for Harrisburg to order, and welcome everyone. We do have a quorum present. Elaine's not able to be with us, and we do have one seat vacant, which we're hoping to appointment before Tuesday. But in any event, we are ready to conduct business today. You have the agenda, and the first thing up is the approval of the minutes of the April 24th meeting. Do I have a motion? All right. Thank you.
Second.
Okay. Are there any comments, corrections, additions to the minutes? Okay. Hearing none. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries unanimously. All right. Let's go to my report. And so this is my first time in the seat here chairing this group. And thank you for the honor, such as it is. No, I honestly, I do appreciate the opportunity. I mean, I think all of us who are on the board are deeply and genuinely committed to the city and its finances and the recovery efforts that are underway. And so are happy to put our time in that effort. And I will begin that by thanking Audrey for her service as chair. And your work has been exemplary, and I hope I can come close.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. So we're also welcoming everyone back from our summer hiatus. That's occasioned largely by the improved financial stability the city's seen, and so our concurrent lack of need to meet on a monthly basis. As we move forward for the balance of this year, our schedule is a little better attuned to the city's financial cycle. So we're going to be meeting in September around the time the budget is nearing finalization for its preparation for consideration. Then we'll be meeting again in December in time to review the budget proposal and present our comments to the city council. We continue to have a good working relationship with Mary Williams, and we are reinstituting our regular meetings with her, although given our more spread schedule, we might be targeting just every other month. And of course, the opportunity to meet more frequently if there are specific issues that arise that we need to discuss with her. My next official meeting with the mayor is in September, just prior to our next meeting. Talk about for that. But I had a separate meeting with her today on another issue, and we had a couple minutes toward the end. She said, "Well, let's chat ICA, shall we?" And we did have a very good discussion, and so I think we're off to a good start. We are also acknowledging the ongoing search for a replacement for Chief of Staff and Business Administrator Dan Hartman, and of course acknowledging the retirement of the Director of Finance Marita Kelly. Both, as I know we've discussed previously, were exceptional in their commitment to their city and in their close working relationship with the ICA. Relative to search matters, I mentioned earlier that we were also looking for our fifth seat, and we'll have to strategize a little bit on that in addition to just rattling the cage at the General Assembly. Let's see. Today's agenda includes review and potential approval of the 2025 five-year plan, and along with a review of the current financial report. Next month's meeting will include a presentation and discussion on the city's economic development planning, and our guests will be Director of Building and Housing Development Gloria Martin Roberts and Economic Development Jason Graves. Okay. Let's move then along into the agenda, and first up is review of the 2025 five-year financial plan. So to set the stage for you, we got the draft for this back in June.
Yes, we saw it.
And Marita, having her calendar that she was trying to hit the mark on, wanted to get it out early for review and consideration. So we did a very close top-level review. We sent an initial 5 pages or so, bullet point comments. And we did a few back and forths along the way. Almost all of the issues were addressed. We did get a number of updated numbers that address some of our primary concerns. And as a result, we have what we think is a fairly good plan in front of you for consideration today. And that then in turn is augmented by an update in the performance charts done by Brian McCutcheon, and we'll be inviting your team to participate in this discussion. As we did the review, there were a handful of things that we focused on. We began by acknowledging the improvements being made in technology rollout, improvements in staffing in the law office, improvements in collections of the neighborhood services fund, some of the, at least the promise and potential for economic development planning, and then the project that's underway to do a graded review of capital assets and capital needs. Our initial reply expressed some concerns with the fund balance, and particularly the neighborhood services fund, because in the initial drafts, it both relied significantly on spend down from fund balances. The response that we got from the finance office improves that considerably, and then with the latest set of figures that were furnished to us just prior to this meeting, gets us very close to the general fund in particular. I think there's only a draw on the fund balance in the 5th year. We'll talk about that in a minute. We asked for some additional detail on economic development planning. We'll be talking about that a little bit more in our next meeting. And then things that we continue to have concerns with are establishment of the OPEB trust and getting that all underway, in part based on its need for Act 47 and then requirements of Act 124 in the Strand Plan. So that kind of sets the stage. I will invite members of the board first to express any comments, reservations, qualifications. And then we will open it up with a problem.
I look forward to hearing what Brian will share. I do think the deficits in the 5th year out and then continuing in neighborhood service fund were most concerning. I guess I had 2 questions or requests. One was that the narrative in the document says that the city may consider a price increase. And in fact, a price increase went into effect this year. And I just wanted to make sure that had actually been transmitted into the number, translated into the numbers. So, and then the second thing is that when the 3 boroughs came up 4 years ago, we were concerned because there weren't any details. There were no measurements of cost assigned. And so the one thing that we held sacred was that the citizens of Harrisburg should never underwrite any of these agreements. And so I know Stilton has been signed, but we don't have any details, so we can't make that judgment at this point. So hopefully, if it's not here, perhaps you could share that with us at a later date. But I agree with everything that Doug said about how much more smoothly it is now. Certainly appreciate Rita's efforts and all of yours to get it done quickly so that she can feel comfortable that she blessed her last submission.
To pick up on Audrey's latter point first, I was surprised that the report kind of patted itself on the back for breaking out the numbers for the other 3 municipalities, because that seemed to me to be something that should have been done at the get-go. So it just struck me that the language was a little overinflated, if you will, with regard to that. Kind of as if someone was saying, wow, we've actually, decided to look at this. It was the actual language and my reading of it, I think, that caught me off guard. The other thing is the OPEB trust language in there indicates that the city of Harrisburg is paying as you go, as are many other municipalities. I get that, but subject to Mike correcting me, my understanding is that the city of Harrisburg is under court order to set up a trust, which has not yet been set up. And for the life of me, given the discussion before the ICA, I don't understand why it has not been. I don't understand why the unions have not pushed more for it. Part of the report says that we think we can pay it off within a 60-year period. Part of the report said that we would be looking at 10-year, 20-year, and 30-year increments. Any of those, in my mind, are maybe realistic, but they are far longer than I think they should be for something that we have known, at least for this time this board has been established, that they need to be taken care of. So that's, I still find personally, as well as professionally as a board member, disappointing that more attention has not been aimed at solving this particular problem.
Why don't we open it up, and Brian, if you or your team have any initial things that you want to present. I know you have the chart, and then in reaction to the comments that you've heard thus far, and then we'll just have an open discussion.
And can I just say, none of this is directed
Right.
at you,
Yeah.
Brian, or your team. This
Yeah.
is just in general, so please, don't take it in that vein.
Very good. Well, Chair Hill, thank you. Board members, I appreciate the time today. Jeffrey, your assistance with what I've been thinking about recently. Would you like me, Kathy, to comment on what you just said first before I get in? It'd be easier than
If you're comfortable doing that,
right. Yeah, the over touting, I guess, within the plan on the narrative of the municipalities. That's a narrative shift. And I know Rita worked on that, adjusting it as we went along. I can say, and maybe this board already realizes it, but we do account for those three boroughs separately on the books. The full works revenue and expenses. But I don't know the timeline of when. In this current report, this is the first time there was that notion about, oh, we've segregated the municipalities. So that's something that can be revisited. I can't recall that section. I know it's there. I just can't recall the exact language. The OPEB trust. Right now, yeah, and again, I believe you're aware of this as well, that there were funds that came out of the strong plan that were deposited or is still on deposit. I mean, in comparison to the projected liability, it doesn't amount very significantly. But I've had some discussions with Neil about that, and I think it's stalled at as far as forming an actual board, getting that created. And I don't, maybe Neil's not here today, but he could comment most intelligently on, going beyond that, what are the reasons behind, the lack of progress. But that's something I can follow up on as well and relay that back out to you.
and we'd appreciate that if you would do that.
I remember he said he worried about the fact that no one was willing to take it on based on their personal liability that they felt they might incur. You remember
There
that?
was some discussion of liability, but I would think there should be some sort of liability insurance available for that as well. I mean, there are pension boards and trust boards set up routinely.
Right, and it's, as you indicate, it's a complicated process because of involving all the bargaining unit agreements that pertain to that, and taking into account to like existing retirees that still benefit from the city's providing medical insurance coverage.
Yeah. I mean, I would hate at this point where we have made as many strides, we collectively, the city of Harrisburg, has made as many strides as it has to be faced with a contempt order at some point because we have not complied with setting up this trust. And frankly, it's distressing to comment and comment and comment and comment and still hear the reply that, well, everybody else is doing it. I mean, you know, kind of conjures up kindergarten kids.
I don't know if there is a timeline. And Neil might, I can talk to him about that. If there is a certain amount of time requirement that, you know, from the point of the strong plan, producing these funds, how much time there is to actually get the OPEB trust established and underway. But that's something I can, you know, talk to him about for a little bit.
Thank you.
I don't recall a timeline
No.
in the strong plan at all, but a reasonable assumption for
Several years.
10 years or so.
Yes.
So,
But I,
Certainly over 10 years at this point.
and if I'm not mistaken, if we can reach an agreement on the lawsuit and the city could exit Act 47, it cannot, if the OPEB trust is not established.
Yeah.
So I would say that means tomorrow is probably not soon enough, because I think the city should be able to exit the moment that we sign this agreement, and that would hold it back and be unfortunate.
And I think we are getting closer to that, the incinerator matter. The parties that are involved, I think they're, it's getting closer to the point where it's actually ready to move into the court phase. So they're from what Neil told me this earlier this week, that I think over 2/3 of the involved parties have finalized that path. So they're still working on. I think there's 2 remaining parties that's still in progress. So it's getting close.
That's great.
Of course, all of that goes to the ability of the city eventually, hopefully, to be able to borrow again if it so needs to do so. And I mean, as long as we're in under this plan, we cannot do that.
Right, which is a very good source to have at your disposal. Okay, well, you've seen me here before previously, of course, and I appreciate my 2 colleagues coming today. Tim Brooks is the city's budget manager. I think Tim's been to one previous meeting going back. I think Tim's been here now over 2.5 years, I want to say. And Alex Burstein. Alex worked quite closely with both Marita and Tim, and was very much assisting Marita with the formatting and getting numbers, and he helped me as well, getting numbers into the new document, the 5-year plan. So Alex is very familiar with the document. He's played a role in getting that lined up and ready for submission. Alex has been here the better part of 6 months. Yep. And so, with that, I'll go to, I think everybody has a handout of what I've been working on, and what
I'm all set.
you need a copy?
Are you gonna, you're gonna use this table, that's it, that's all, correct?
Right, it's, yeah, the hand. So with Maria's timeline for her retirement, it did create a bit of a compressed amount of time to go through and generate the original plan. And of course, with your input, we were able to go back and revisit everything, language, numbers. But still, between then and now, over these last few weeks, I can't get out of my mind that sliding fund balance that rolls when you look at the table 1, which is the summary schedule. And use of fund balance is one thing, but if you're not really using it for significant extraordinary items, such as what we've experienced in the near past, the AMBAC debt, currently what's being moved forward with the FMD Field Stadium project, that lends itself to being a reasonable use of fund balance. And the city does have capital expenditures within the general. Those are really not of a capital project nature. They're really just capital expenditures that happen to meet the city's threshold of $5,000 or more is being classified as capital. So this, what I did with this handout is create PowerPoint-like slides to kind of lead us through this more effectively and efficiently, I believe. So the first one talks about the summary schedule. And on the actual schedule, you'll see what I've done is it's basically the same format, but I'm showing expenditures or expenses in one line. The other schedule doesn't really show that. It includes, our original schedule shows operating expenses, so-called, and baseline capital expenses, but there's no total line. So I wanted to establish that. And then also at the bottom, we have that calculation of the cash fund, the ending cash balance as a percentage of expenses. In the original schedule, it's taking a percentage of expenses without capital expenses. So really that's not accurate. The schedule I revised just basically takes ending cash divided by total expenses, just to give you a true calculation. The next slide I talk about the city's normal recurring revenue. And this is important mainly for our budget building process. And if you look at the next two pages that follow that slide, the first page is, these are identical schedules. And this focuses on the revenue. The first one is what was submitted within the 5-year plan that you have. And the next page is are my revised numbers. But what I want to point out in the shaded part of the submitted schedule, you can see we have resulting normal recurring revenue. And it goes across the years. For 2023, 70.1 million is very, very close to what the city has experienced in past years. We've always heard 68 million, 69 million, and it has been progressively increasing. But now I think that we are up at that level as sort of a barometer of pure recurring revenue. So 2023 has the 70.1, 2024 has 72.5, but that is not too far off from being reasonable as well, because it's being affected by the increase in the EIT revenue. The ability of the city to take more in generated hotel tax revenue. We've tamped that down in recent years to build up a cash position in the capital projects fund. And that's where the revenue is received and booked. So another $300,000 in hotel tax is quite reasonable to expect. Also, the city generates street cut revenue, which has been very active in recent years. And there's another $385,000 in street cut revenue that I believe can be generated for this year's projection. And also our medical stop loss has gone up, and that just reflects our increase in our medical claim expenses. So those four items make up the majority of the difference where we leap from 70.1 to 72.5. Any questions on that before I move on to the revised schedule?
I'm still trying to catch up.
Okay. Got it.
Okay, right.
Okay, right. So when we submitted the document, the revenue projections for 25 through 28 were a bit on the strong side, 72.2 million, 72.3, 72.5, and so on. And revisiting this for me, they seemed a bit on the high side. So my revised schedule at the bottom in the shading, I've tamped that down, for 25 through 2028, where the revenue is more in the $71.5 million range over these years. It fluctuates a little bit, but I think it's a more reasonable presentation. Do you see that down?
It was on the.
I was like, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't know if it's exactly the same. Whoops.
My apologies
Sorry.
for not
No,
numbering. Okay.
no, it doesn't matter. It's those were mine. Sorry,
Okay.
got it.
And the reason that's important is to use the recurring revenue to get a sense of what you can then, how to build your budget, to try to have the city live within its means. I'll go to the next page. And again, the only changes I'm proposing just affects the 25 through 2028 years. 2023 and 2024 are undisturbed. But this lays out what I talked about with revenue and the effect. The overall effect is down at the bottom. And we factored in a concern over the real estate tax revenue. The potential for that to be somewhat diminished over future years based on if there's a push to have reassessments done on large building properties to potentially reduce real estate tax revenue for the city. The EIT, again, it's been increasing, but it just feels like it is peaking. I wouldn't want us to have continued increases that we've had in recent years from 22 to 23 and from last year to this year. It's been a great boost in revenue for the city, but I can't expect that to continue to increase at the rate it has been. So that's been tamped down a little bit. The next two lines, DBHD and public safety. DBHD is the Department of Building and Housing Development. These fluctuate somewhere around 2 million to at a point could be 2.1 million, could be 1.9. And in our original submission, we left it at 2 million, but we had it increasing every year at a rate. I'd feel more comfortable if we would just leave that flat for both of these items, because you just don't see a consistent increase every year. And for building and housing development, the biggest part of that revenue is the city's building permits that flow through our department, our Bureau of Codes. And the public safety revenue is based on police extra duty for when they're called out to provide services to various entities. They're both very strong, but it just feels like those would be better served if they were listed as flat recurring revenue lines. The transfers in. This originally was just submitted as the $425,000 that the city would realize from the Senator's Fund after the completion of the stadium improvement project. But when I was thinking about all this, one thing that occurred to me with the ARPA funds is that the city, of course, has had this huge amount of money, but it has been subject to earning interest. And I've reread the final rule guidelines on this, and there's no violation of having it earn interest. If you do earn interest, you do not have to return it to the federal government like you would in a lot of our federal grants. And further, the use of that money is not restricted. So what that means is, if you remember going back to 2021, 2022, when the city received those two 50% tranches of 23 million, it's been generating a lot of interest. And I project by the end of this year, even though some of the money is now starting to be more actively used, there's still quite a bit. Relatively, about half of the original 47 million is still on deposit. I project we will have 3.6 million in interest income cumulative by the end of this year. So that's an add-in that I think is worthwhile to work into this analysis. At the same time, to treat that as an available reserve, which I'll get to when I go forward with the rest of these pages. Any questions to this point?
Question or comment, if I may, I normally don't jump in, but your comment about the real estate taxes and making provisions for potential tax assessment appeals, whether it comes to commercial buildings in the city. Has the city had discussions with the county on doing a countywide reassessment?
In our department, we have not. I don't know if that's occurred at the law bureaus.
So I raise this because I think it's an important issue that, and I'm dealing with this for a large institutional client that I represent that has commercial property in the county, but it's not the city, where we filed a tax assessment appeal. And one of the things that's driving the tax assessment appeals is the increase in the common level ratio that is determined annually at the state level, and a common level ratio is assigned to each county within the Commonwealth. And we have seen pretty significant increases in the common level ratio for Dauphin County in particular. And the common level ratio, I may mess this up, but the basic reason for a common level ratio is to provide a leveling of tax assessments based upon fair market value within the county. And in Dauphin County and other counties in the Commonwealth, what's driving increases recently in the common level ratio is the increases that we've seen in the fair market value of residential properties. So when you see increases in the common level ratio in the county and you apply that common level ratio to the assessed valuation of commercial property, that results in an implied fair market value for the commercial property. So what that means is that the implied fair market value for commercial properties has been going up and up each year as the common level ratio has been increasing. But in fact, there's been a disconnect between the actual fair market value of commercial properties versus the implied fair market value based upon the assessed value and the common level ratio. So what that does is it sets the stage for tax assessment appeals where the owners, the commercial property, can go to the tax assessment appeals board and say, we're assessed too high, you need to reduce our assessment so that when you apply the common level ratio, it is on par with the fair market value of the property. So this is a long explanation, but what that means then is that the tax base is eroding particularly when it comes to commercial properties. And in an urban environment, a lot of commercial properties that are, for a number of reasons, particularly in the post-pandemic environment where the valuations of commercial properties are going down and the assessed value is going, or the implied fair market value is going up, it is creating a firestorm for the city and its tax base. This could all be remedied by a countywide real estate reassessment of all property within the county. That's not the popular thing to do, but it's a critical thing for the city in terms of preserving its tax base. And that is a critical piece, in my opinion, for the city to look at in terms of its financial health in the short and long term. Because as time goes on, you will see an erosion of your tax base and a reduction in real estate tax revenues, so long as the county is not doing a reassessment. The county is doing a reassessment.
Right, and it's been 25 years, right, since they last did it. So you get your values that have been really screwed up. So
Okay, so what we've seen on the state level is the local government commission is undertaking an examination of potential legislation, which would make countywide reassessment automatic to counties throughout the Commonwealth. as opposed to the way it is now, which it takes an action in each county to decide to do a reassessment, and as it was described, it can be unpopular or disruptive. It was triggered by statewide legislation that said you must do it, for example, every 10 years. Then counties like Dauphin County would automatically be forced by state legislation to do it. It would be out of the hands of county officials to decide whether the time is right now to do it or not. It would just become automatic. Believe it or not, there are many local county officials across the state who support a proposal to take the decision away from county leaders and make it required by statewide legislation, because it's a tough decision to make. And if you make it automatic, as it is in many other states, then that's one less tough decision that you have to make. It just becomes bottom line. So that might resolve Dauphin County and other counties who are now somewhat, to use a real technical term, out of whack with their reassessments, and the time has come. I do think it's what Brian, and I'll try to bring this back to what Brian has pointed out. Harrisburg is by far not the only city who is extremely concerned about eroding tax base, because commercial property owners in Harrisburg, as well as all the major cities in Pennsylvania, have taken upon themselves not to wait to see if there are reassessments, but just to challenge their individual property assessments because they're worried about themselves. And as they do that, it is driving down the revenue that cities especially are seeing across the Commonwealth, because they are seeing individual certiorari of taxpayers, not a holistic look at property assessments across the county. And I think that the city of Harrisburg is in as major as any city in the Commonwealth. I think that we'll see diminishing revenue unless the system is changed in the next few years. But that's a much wider discussion, even bigger than the city of Harrisburg.
If you see me up here twitching,
I do see you twitching.
represented Pennsylvania County government for close to 40 years. It was a perennial issue, and there were a number of different flavors of solutions. Your representation is correct. The association supported mandatory reassessment, but with a handful of conditions
Sure.
related to market structure, related to some fundamental changes in how the statutes are arrayed and values are determined, and then also finding some revenue source to help pay for the cost of doing the revaluation.
Sure.
But we do look to a lot of other states where they have cyclical revaluations that are done successfully, and because they are done on a cyclical basis with certain equities and stop losses and all the rest, generally accepted by the public as just a matter of fact, and an understanding that its fundamental reason is not to increase revenue, but rather to improve equity.
Which is the best reason. But I think we could go back to what Brian said about, he's right to forecast diminishing revenue in the near term because that is the circumstance.
Well, yes, unfortunately, you can't escape that. And again, the city solicitor's office, Neil, he's been hearing, maybe even seeing some rumblings about just this. There's been this push. And I think you could tie it back to more people remoting and teleworking as opposed to actually coming in. And I think these property owners are not experiencing maybe the revenue levels that they need to pay these taxes. So that's the move to try to get a break in real estate. And the warning is there's been so many of these big commercial buildings that are driving in that direction. And that has the impact. So the challenge is, all right, how do you reduce revenue? How do you project it? And you just, we don't know the timing. If it would happen in one particular year or over multiple years. So this is just I thought there was too much of a reduction in the first document we submitted. I thought it was too heavy. So I came back with a little better outlook on, with my revised numbers. And I tend to say, like, we're hovering around the better part of 16 million over these years, where the city is used to being at 17 million. Whether or not I can't, accurately state to you that that's a very solid thing to do, but it's something to at least take into account projection wise.
Ryan, did your projections take into consideration what I would describe as a lot of new construction that looks like it's for residential purposes? And my personal circumstances have changed, and I'm driving on a daily basis, which is something I absolutely hate because I'm used to walking to work. So I'm seeing more of these buildings that are about to come online.
On the plus side,
Yes,
Right,
on
up-
Sixth
up
Street
to offset.
particularly, yeah. Do you think that will offset some, most, not much?
again, that's a tough thing to quantify, but certainly, and then how much, like, if I haven't gone far enough, then maybe that in my reduction, that offset will counter that,
Okay,
right? To what you're saying, but we really didn't look at that perspective directly.
okay. And Michael was talking about the lowering, the potential for lowering assessments on the commercial buildings. Does it follow necessarily that there will be increases on residential properties?
Based on a countywide assessment occurring, I don't know that's well enough to make a good comment.
Fair enough.
I mean,
Fair
but
enough.
I would think, but what is the impact? I would think there
Yeah.
would be, but I don't know how material an impact it would be.
Because again, the statistics we're seeing indicate that a lot of the population of the city of Harrisburg just will not be able to withstand significant increases in real estate taxes.
Right, whether it's an increase in millage, which is not what we're saying, or a change in the assessment.
So it's hard to say because it's not just residential and commercial. When you do a countywide reassessment, it looks at a variety of uses. So it's multifamily, single family, it's size of lot, it's zip code. Assessment is a complicated thing, and what it does is it tries to strike a balance throughout the entire county. And as you can imagine, the northern end of the county, the central part of the county, the southern end of the county, it's a diverse county. And so that's one of the reasons countywide reassessment is so expensive and complicated when it's done. But if it's done correctly, the one thing you're sure of is at the end of a reassessment process, there's equity, which is what was discussed. So that is, your assessed value is correct in proportion to everybody else. And as Mike said, in fact, if you do it correctly, initially, your common level ratio would be 1. That is, your fair market value and your assessed value, for that, at least for that very first year, are the same. And everybody is, their property is what it's worth. Then over time, that starts to drift. And that's why regular, semi-regular countywide assessments are so important, because it brings everything back to actual from estimated value. So it's hard to say I wouldn't want people to be concerned who, for example, watch this online. It's very hard to say or to guess, and people often do, what the impact of countywide assessment would have on city properties or their property in particular. You just have to have confidence in the system, and that's important, that whoever does the reassessment is going to balance everything efficiently, effectively, and fairly throughout the county, and then it falls where it may. And in some counties, it has shifted the burden towards residential, but not always. And sometimes new residential versus old residential. And of course, the city has a lot of older residential housing. it's very hard to say, like I said, it's just not one flavor. So it's hard to say how it would impact. But as long as it's done right, it's the fairest way to do it. And it's I don't know, we're talking about Dauphin County, but I think Mike and I both know this is a huge issue right now in Cumberland County. And in the city of Lancaster, it's a huge issue. And there's actually a lawsuit between the Pittsburgh School District and Allegheny County about this exact issue. So it is sweeping across Pennsylvania as a major economic issue. And it's just reflected in some numbers that Brian has to estimate on this data. The big problem, that's not an Harrisburg problem.
Thank you.
Okay, I'll move on to the next slide, which is about the capital expenditures revised. So once I determined what my revised revenue would be for these particular years, I knew I had to go back and revisit like all expenses, and I started with capital expenditures. So page that follows the slide will show you the capital expenses, the comparisons to what was originally submitted versus what has been revised. Overall, it's a pull down of for each year, except for 2026 is actually a bit of an increase, a little over $50,000, but there is in the other years for 25, 27, and 28, a decrease for each year of roughly $460,000. So that's just taken from the various pots of the capital needs that are in. There's that one schedule in the document that details out the department's needs, including our IT department, police and fire, VMC, which is Vehicle Maintenance Center, engineering. Now, the Broad Street market is included, but there's no change in that because that's a pure estimate of what we anticipate for next year in 2026 in the way of cost. But that is totally offset. Had to do it that way based on the anticipation of additional insurance recovery proceeds. So it's a wash, but it's reflected here to show that it's included. There's no change in that number. That's the 4.5 million for each year, 25 and 26. So there again, there has to be, when it comes to cutting expenses, you have to, of course, address all areas. So I started with the capital. The idea is there's still some significant dollars available for their needs. I tried to be as kind as I could when it comes to that type of analysis. Pretty much self-explanatory on that. I'll move on to the next slide, which is total expenses. And again, the same revised schedule follows that slide. The big changes there. I went personnel. I went back to our collective bargaining agreements and took a look at what percentages are still in play for next year, which includes ASME, and police and fire go further into 1 or 2 years subsequent to next year. So I identified those rates that are playing in each agreement and worked out what I thought was reasonable for any management level personnel, within those categories, and came up with a method to estimate an increase. So I was able to cut back on our personnel expenses by the amounts that you see at the top there on that schedule page. They're not huge, but there is a bit of a pullback on personnel. The next line down is medical claims. I have that basically unchanged. We're experiencing in the last year and this year much increase in medical costs. And I'm being a bit optimistic here, hoping that that will stabilize and not continue to increase up where we're going like above 13.5 million, pushing 14 million in any particular year. There's no change in supplies, but services, I did do a change. We actually, in the document, in the narrative, we have for supplies, we have a 2% increase. Services, though, we put in at 3%. So I, and just for consistency, I tamped down 3% to 2% for services. Again, in the hope that inflation is near its end and is also stabilizing as we go into future years. There's no change in debt. That's an easy one. We know what that is. Capital expenditures, we just talked about that previously. Transfers out, there's no change there. And nothing in the other operating category, no change there. So it's a combination of visiting those expenses and capital that help get us back down to trying to achieve a minimal, if not no, use of fund balance for these future years. The next 2 pages that follow that, I lay these in here because this is just my revised numbers. You see this 2-page schedule in the document near the back end. And it's just a breakdown by the city's functional expense classifications. I just wanted to include it. The last page is just a summary takeaway. And 3 to 4 main items here, of course, try to eliminate that draw on fund balance throughout those future years. And achieving a balanced budget. And by building your budget based on normal recurring revenue. The interest income reserve, now that's certainly meaningful. As I mentioned, that's 3.6 million, but that's a one-time event, not a recurring revenue source, but I think it would be good to not act upon that immediately. I hearken back to the AMBAC payoff and the geo debt going away, and that's that 8 million to 8.5 million, wanting to have that as a cushion. To me, this is similar. There's an available cushion that's out there of 3.6 million, but I'm using it over the course of the latter years, 26, 2027, and 28, to bridge the gap between revenues and expenses. I'm hopeful that somewhere down the road, we might start seeing some increases in revenue that the city was expecting, namely the parking revenue. I mean, it's very difficult to say it will come back to the levels that it should be at, but I'm hopeful that not so much next year, but maybe as we get into those future years, that revenue will start to be generated again. There's also the consideration about our capital fire protection allocation to the state. And we're holding our ground on that. That's consistently been 5 million every year. But I know our Bureau of Fire, our fire chief, he has an interest in that and trying to produce an acceptable rate of increase in that line. But that's not something that we're budgeting for 2021. Obviously, better stabilization of the city's ending cash balance. If you were to ask me what's a good cash position, I always feel like, like 12 million at the low end and maybe 15 million at the high. It's somewhere in there, and I feel good about that. That really represents good coverage on, say, 2 months worth of payroll and check run expenditures and medical claims as well. So this, in the end, what we have in the current document has an ending cash position at the end of 2028 of 11.1 million. It's a little on the low side, but again, it's reflecting that slide of using too much fund balance throughout those latter years. This revised presentation is healthier it's up over 15 million, 15.3 in comparison, which I certainly liken that to, as far as a better presentation. And I think too, what this, not just from the revision, but this document, I think is out there. We put a lot of time, a lot of review. You review it with extended time. But I think there's always an opportunity here to use this for our budget process, our budget move. And we're right in the thick of that right now. So I feel like it's a good source. We can start out by, and Tim can attest to this, he's collecting data and input from various departments to try to build their budgets for next year. And to me, once you get these departments that are laid out in this document, you know, what their total ask might be, then this gives you a chance to evaluate it, you know, compare it to what we have with these numbers. So I think that might be helpful. That's the end of my revision. And again, I'm not trying to create extra work on anybody, but it's certainly, I felt like it was worthwhile, you know, to at least consider this or to explore it for your consideration and review.
I'll open it up for additional comments and questions, but just as a procedural matter, to update the report with these numbers, I presume that's going to end up being multiple tables that need to be touched.
Well, it is, but it's pretty isolated because it's just a general fund. And it's a pretty straightforward process. I actually have Alex in mind to if we have to go down that road to assist with that, that would be, we could achieve that, I think, fairly efficiently.
Okay. All right, comments and questions.
Well, I was gonna say, you said music to my ears when you said that you use this document to help inform budgets, which is what I think we've said all along, that it is a useful discipline that has a very worthwhile outcome. And I will applaud you over the years. I don't think there's been a bigger defender of the fund balance than you, because you've always, well, you've spoken honestly and you've said, I really want to make sure we don't go over this number because it'll affect the fund balance. So thank you for that stewardship.
Thank you.
So just procedurally for the board, if the outcome of this discussion is that the city will issue a revised document, the 5-year plan that I'm holding a draft of, or will issue a final document with revised numbers, you have choices to make as the board. One of those choices is you could accept the document conditional upon the revisions that have been discussed today. Or you could wait till you have the revised document in hand and then take it up for consideration at that point. We have done in our history both. So we have done waiting to get the final, and we have done conditional approvals, knowing that the city has pledged to do one last update after the approval was given. So that's a board decision.
So I think framing the question, then it revolves around how substantive we think the revisions are, whether we need to see a revised copy, or if we think it's understandable enough as presented today that we can just accept it on a conditional basis. And I presume that means also trying to address a couple of the narrative and other comments that were made.
I mean, that's fine. I have that correct, right?
That is correct.
Mr. Silsby. Okay, so it's really up to you three, how you want to proceed at this point. Okay, we'll find you.
I would be comfortable, based on Brian's presentation, going with a conditional approval of what he has presented. I applaud you for going back and being willing to look at your own numbers and go, these need to be changed here and there. I mean, that's not an easy process in itself, but it clearly indicates a lot of thought being given on these. So I'd be very comfortable going with approving it conditioned upon revisions as presented here.
And so maybe body language, reminder here, you don't make a motion that effect.
So moved.
I will second Kathy's motion.
Okay, and that opens us up for discussion on the motion. Do I have any discussion? Mike?
You okay?
Yeah, I'm fine with that. That seems reasonable.
I would only ask, is this a motion both to give conditional approval and authorize the transmittal with correspondence accordingly, or we want to take that up as a second motion?
I'm good with a package deal.
Got it.
Okay.
So,
Yeah. Well, I'll just comment and echo that I truly appreciate not only the initiative to go back and review it, but the level of detail that you all have put into it. And I think certainly defensible conclusions, defensible adjustments.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Other comments or questions? And on the motion, all those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Could I just add, just because I must admit, I'm a little weak on proper process and procedure now from this point.
sure.
Okay.
So it's pretty straightforward. We'll obviously need a new document with a new date on it. It could be marked final, if you want, but it'll definitely have to be dated with a new date. Because the last submission date was August 2nd, and obviously that'll have to be updated to a new date after today's meeting. That'll be transmitted to the ICA. That along with correspondence, which is why I mentioned it, to go back to the city, to the mayor, and saying that the actions of the board to accept this document as the plan for 2025. And then it's official. I would suggest, although unless the board has an opinion otherwise, that you perhaps might want to share the revised document with the controller's office, because they only got to see the preliminary document. And I'm sure they'd have interest in seeing the revised document. So that's something you probably, when you send it to us, you probably want to share it with the controller's office as well. I don't know if anybody else has the other thing.
Well, I know the chair is going to send a letter. Should that wait until we get?
Yeah,
So that-
absolutely.
So the date
Yeah.
is
Yes.
after.
The letter will go back to the city after the revised plan is submitted to the ICA board. So it'll go to us, then back to the city.
But I think Brian can be comfortable in reporting to the mayor that it's accepted.
Yeah,
pending
with
these-
revisions.
Right. Oh, and I'm glad you said that, because I did actually meet with the mayor on this 2 times. One time was sort of a preliminary run through, but just last week I sat down with her for a little more time. And I wanted to be sure that she was comfortable with it before I brought this to you.
And she,
Wise move.
and
Yeah.
she mentioned that to me in my meeting with her today.
Oh, excellent.
Right, so what you're presenting is
She
accurate.
remembers.
Yes.
Well, then, speaking of the mayor, I know there's when Marita released this, there was a cover letter.
There is a certification.
Does that have to?
I'll refer to the former chair. Does the mayor's certification have to be recertified, or we have a copy of a certification for the 25 plan already signed from the mayor? Is that sufficient for our needs?
Well, I would suggest, since it's minor, to take the same letter, because I think it would also be good to refer to Chair Hill. Because it refers to me, so, and then redate it, but
Redate it
nothing
the same
else,
date as the-
nothing else.
Then
needs to
that's a
change.
good suggestion.
Yeah.
So then they marry in date, so the revised plan with the revised certification. With the same date. To the new chair.
And then our letter.
Will be after the-
Will reflect the updated date.
Right. Excellent. Good points.
And my last question is timeline. I mean, is there a preference when you'd like to have this become available?
As soon as possible.
Possible.
I mean, legitimately, the timeline's okay because this board is already active.
Right.
If they had not acted today, we would have had a problem, but they took action, so I think we're okay. But there's no point in dragging this out, since you know
No, no.
it's whatever you and Alex can do to get this done. Is probably the best answer. And of course, just email to me and I'll do all the distributions, you don't have to worry, other than the control.
Pretty good, yes.
I'll take care of the ICA stuff.
All right, with the completion of that agenda item, next up is a discussion of current financial status.
I don't know if there's anything else to add.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I think I'll just, I do have something, but I thought this would be a good opportunity for me to take a break. And hand it off to Tim. He has some thoughts on the city's current year's budget, the mid-year report that is in progress.
Thank you.
So can't share this obviously because we haven't produced it and published it for the city council and the rest of the executive staff. So I can high level detail in terms of, not high level detail, but high level overview so that we can get an understanding of where the city stands halfway through the year in comparison to last year. Now, I also want to say that and caveat that we do have ARPA money within this year's figures that inflate our numbers for this year in comparison to last year. So I want to draw that attention to that information only because it is significant in the amount of just about $26.2 million. We just wanted to make sure that that's understandable before I move forward. So at the halfway point of 2024, in terms of revenue, we brought in $65,551,976 of the amended budget, $118,294,301, which represents 55% of the revenue thus far. Meaning we're about halfway in terms of what we're anticipating for the revenue for 2024. For expenses, currently we're at $61,180,354 of the anticipated amended budget of $412,392, which represents just 56%. So again, we're right at the halfway point of what we budget in terms of our expenditures and what we spent so far. The resulting cash fund balance increase is about $4 million, $4,371,000, taking our $4,371,623, which increases our cash fund balance from about $19,643,269 to about $24,014,892. So effectively, we're putting a little bit into our cash fund, our fund balance, while staying where we need to be in terms of budgetarily for the halfway through the year.
And we always have a discrepancy with what the controller says, right? Because his numbers are always lower, because he takes all the encumbrances
Yeah.
and puts them in. So, because that's usually I'm always just lighting on those numbers. So when you say them and they differ, I'm like, wait a minute, where's that
Yes,
5 million go?
You'll see more of the information and how the breakdowns and the details and the footnotes and everything when we present this, and you guys will obviously get it.
Great.
Questions? Comments?
No, so.
Yeah, the last bit I have, it kind of follows on what Tim just went through. And I know, I believe Jeff asked what I send out monthly to Madra.
Yeah.
And we're through July, of course, based on that month. Put some perspective. The city's cash position at the end of July is 21.9 million. And that compares favorably with the start of the year of 19.6. In addition to that, where we were at this time last year, at the end of July, the city was at 20.5 million. So that's another good indicator for this year's activity. That's the general fund. Neighborhood services, I don't have much to report on that, but I did look at the cash position. And right now, in that fund, at the end of July, the cash position is $6,055,000. That's down a bit from the beginning of the year. It's down about $100,000. And even though there's been, Audrey mentioned the rate increase. I mean, that did take effect at the beginning of the year with the first billing. So the receipts on that really didn't start to materialize until February. But that's in effect. But there were, as part of that fund, the general fund pays throughout the year all the medical claims. But then what we do is come back and allocate based on the city's IT reports to allocate what portion of that is attributable to the neighborhood services fund and that personnel. So then we'll transfer those funds over to the general fund to in effect reimburse the general fund. So I mentioned earlier, especially first 6 months of this year, I mean, the claims were quite significant. Our medical claims happen weekly. And it seems like every month, the first 6 months, there's been a week where the claims have amounted to about double what we normally like to see. That in recent times has slowed down. And so I'm hopeful that will continue throughout the remainder of this year. So the neighborhood services fund took a bit of a heavier hit on medical during the first 6 months of this year. And I did check with our HR departments, our benefit specialist who's close to that activity. And we can expect some relief in the form of additional stop loss payment before the end of the year. And we actually we increased our budget for that just based on, these significantly large medical expenses. So I'm hopeful that happens. That'll hit as close as we can to budget.
Okay,
Sure.
questions? Anything else for us, Brian?
That's funny.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. I appreciate you being here today, Justin. And so now we will move on to the authority managers update. Okay, Bill, report.
Thank you. We'll talk about money that has to do with the authority as opposed to the city. Everybody has in their packet a rather significant and lengthy paid bills report, only because we haven't met in a while, so the report's a little long. But you will see that we've successfully ended and successfully begun another fiscal year. We go by the state calendar. So that's good. And we also have a healthy fund balance, which is the important thing. If there's any questions about any of the bills on our list, please don't hesitate to ask. I've tried to keep it organized. You'll notice that our virtual office at what was called Pursuit Harrisburg is now renamed Co-working Harrisburg. But
Renamed it again?
yes, but it was sold.
That's hard.
But I will say that the rate has gone up, so that's the important thing in terms of, they're still billing us the same monthly fee. And managers come and go, and some are better at handling our papers and some are worse, but I guess it's a high turnover of managing virtual office. So, but other than that, everything is right on track, and of course, as I said, we do have a significant fund balance, and we've begun our new fiscal year, which brings me to the other document which I handed out, which is approval of our 2024-2025 operating budget. Yes, our year has begun, but we still have to do our budget because thank goodness we're not a third-class city, so we're not in any violation. But we do like to get this done at the first meeting that we possibly can. So I've worked with the chair to create a budget which is extremely similar to every other budget we've ever done. There are not significant differences. I will point out that the authority has offered to assist the city of Harrisburg with membership in the PA Downtown Center. And while they haven't yet taken us up on that offer, the offer stands, and that money is allocated in the budget. And if there are other ways that we could assist organize things for the city, I'm sure the board would be open to those discussions as well. In addition to helping pay for membership in the PA downtown center.
Knowing the new director, interim director, there's gonna be a jump on it.
Well, that's fine. There are resources. I think it's just and the board and the city can have that conversation when it's appropriate. I'm sure that you would like to assist move the economic and development plan forward and any other way that the ICA can be of beneficial value to the city. I'm sure you'd like to. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I would like to offer the budget as presented for adoption for the 2024-2025 year.
Okay, do I have a motion to adopt the budget?
I move.
I second.
Okay, discussion. None, all those in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Aye, any opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
And I will follow that by saying that I will now issue an invoice to the Department of Community Economic Development for our subsidy for the new fiscal year. And I'll work with them to make sure it gets processed accordingly through the vendor system, which is always exciting for me because the state doesn't make paying bills all that easy for vendors. But we'll get through it. We always do. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Board members, any other business? Okay. We'll do public comment.
Yeah, we do obviously have a representative from the Department of Community Economic Development. Roger Clay, would you like to offer any comments or questions?
Nothing on your comment.
Well, we really appreciate your participation as always. And Brian,
Very copy
of the handout from the city.
Yes.
That you can get a copy of. Everything else, you'll have to wait till it's on our website, but I could also let you know when it's there.
Sounds good.
But the handout, we will give you a copy.
Thank you so much. And the next meeting is Wednesday, September 25th, 2024. And here in the same location. We are. Great. And do I have a motion to adjourn?
You do.
Okay, so that is 4:18 PM. Good night, everyone.